Anybody that's on Facebook will tell you that I do a pretty good job of trying to keep people aware of what I'm doing, what my positions are on Facebook. So it's just one other medium. I'm hoping I have time for that, I don't know. But I am going to come up with a system. And, you know, I told my campaign manager up there this weekend that I have to figure out a way. Look, the other thing I'm going to tell you, I don't like to talk about the game until the game's over. And I don't like to talk about what I'm going to do until the final bell blows and the game's over and I know I won. But I can tell you, if I am elected, as you said, which I can be if I get the support of all of you, that's going to be one of my goals, is to make sure I'm communicating with people.
I have two questions. I'm Tim McLaughlin. I have two questions. One, I'd like to know, it's not hard to understand that tax and corporate tax structure moves or brings corporations in. With the United States having one of the highest tax structures in the world, corporate tax structures, I'd like to know what your opinion is on being able to reform that. Also, our income tax structure, and also one of the 2 or 3 entitlement changes that you might believe in changing.
I would tell you this, that we do have the second highest corporate tax rate in the world. And we need to fix that. Because when you have the second highest corporate tax rate in the world, people are going to find other places to go. We also have legislation out there and a Congress today that's voting cap and trade, they're voting health care. Those are all other pieces, because those are taxes too, in a way. And those are expenses that hit the bottom line. It's where people say, you know what, I might as well move here or move there. I shouldn't stay here. We've got a problem. We need to simplify. That's why I told you we need less government, less taxes. So I am a firm believer we need to look at our tax system. I'm also a firm believer that our income tax system is very burdensome and troublesome. I'm a CPA. I've been a CPA for going on 28 years now. I believe we need tax reform. Now, it's interesting because I was asked this question in a debate. I was asked, do you believe we need tax reform? And my answer was yes. I was then asked, what do you think of the fair tax system? And a lot of you have gotten these flyers that say Jim Renacci wants to raise your taxes 23%. When I was asked about the fair tax system, here was my answer. I said the fair tax system is a good system, but I don't think it can be implemented. There'd be a problem with implementation. But if you look at my website, so I never really did agree to the fair tax system, but the interesting thing about that flyer that you all got, what they forgot to write in there, we call it half-truths, lies, whatever you want to say, is that if the fair tax system was implemented, it eliminates the IRS. It eliminates the current tax system. It eliminates the current tax rate. So they didn't say that. All right? And it's interesting they didn't say that. But here's what I'm for. I'm for a simpler tax system that reduces taxes. And if we can simplify our tax code and reduce taxes so you and everybody in this country has an opportunity to keep more of what they earn, that's what I'm for.
How about entitlement? What entitlement reform are you going to propose to reduce our debt?
You know, Congressman Pence has come up with a great proposal, which I'm an advocate of, and I support what he's talking about. He's talking about coming up with a statutory limit on spending. Now, people have used what I just said there and changed it around, but it's a limit on spending, overall spending. And you put a statutory limit on spending. And he said that if you go over the last 200 years, that the federal government has been able to live with about 20% of GDP. And I think we should be able to live within our means, just like a business owner has to live within his means, just like a family has to live within their means. So my first belief is that we need to get control of our spending by putting a limit, and his limit is 20% of GDP. And then what you do is you take a look at some of the things we need to make sure we protect. We need to make sure we protect our military spending. We need to make sure we protect our Medicare spending for our elderly, and we need to make sure we protect certain things, but the majority of non-discretional spending, we need to start taking a look at and bringing it down. So I think that's the best way of doing it. Instead of zeroing in, let's start. As a business owner, I've had to do that many, many times. This is all we can spend. Now let's protect military, let's protect our veterans, let's protect Medicare. But everything else has to come down. And we need to look at it across the board.
As you propose those kind of cuts, how are you going to be able to handle those that are going to say, oh, but Jim Renacci has cut education, you know, he's cut medical, or whatever, you know that's going to happen, you know, they'll use it against you instead of for you, that you have the foresight to cut the spending, which is what we have to do, and it's going to hurt everybody, and everyone's going to scream.
We have to make some tough decisions. I got to tell you, when I took over the car dealership, I cut donuts out. All right? That was a tough decision because there were a lot of people that were mad at me. But I said, you know what? We're going to start at the small. Everything we need to take a look at. When I cut the donuts out, I remember one of the employees came up to me and said, that doesn't cost that much. And I said, well, then why don't you pay for it? And you know what? When that happened, they started to realize that we had to cut and we had to look at everything. So, look, let's face it. We're in a situation we got to bring spending down. And we got to do what we can. So we need to be able to look at those items and see what we can do.
The Constitution recently, over the years actually, someone else walked in here, has been kicked around, treated like it's something that's passe. I'd like to know what your feelings are about our Constitution. Our founding fathers wrote the Constitution, got us to where we are probably today, despite some other people thinking that this is a rag or this is something that's, I heard somebody call it a living, breathing document or something. What's your feeling on that?
Well, you know what? I believe the founding fathers were some pretty intelligent guys, and they wrote the Constitution, and we need to abide by it. I think you'll see here, and I'm pretty sure I've got it with me. There's the Constitution right there. So I keep it with me. I'm a firm believer in it, and I think it's something we need to withhold. We need to be able to stand up and defend it. So if you elect me, that's what I'll do.
My name is Jan Pedro. I have a question. This again regarding the Constitution. If you're elected to the Hill, as I call it, would you keep our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion, as it was stated in the Constitution? Because the people on the Hill now are really shaking the tree, trying to get rid of the freedom of speech, the airways. I'm sure everybody has heard about it. And I'd like the feelings on it.
Well, I can tell you that I'm a again, I believe in our freedom of speech, and I'm going to do whatever I can to protect that freedom of speech. So there's no doubt about it. In fact, isn't it interesting that the same freedom of speech you're talking about gives ASME the right to send half-truth ads out about Jim Renacci? And you don't see me complaining about that, other than I'm just mad that they don't tell the whole truth.
I know you talked about, cutting off small things like you did the donuts, but what about starting with the big things, like the Department of Education? Things that are costing our country so much money, that are so unnecessary, that need to come back to the states, back to our local communities, instead of in Washington. Would you support dismantling some of the bigger in Washington, like Department of Education, which we just feel like they just spend money, and we spend so much per student, and here in Medina, we're losing so much for our school, which we're paying more per student, and it just seems like the bigger agencies in Washington are consuming money, and we don't have a way to stop it.
Well, you do. You have to put people in Congress who know how to balance a budget and cut spending and do it in the right ways. I would tell you, and it's the first time you've had a chance to meet me, but I've said all along that education is a local issue. I believe in the voucher system, and I believe we need to push as much education back to the local area, into the local communities as possible.
Jim, do you believe in line item veto?
You know, here's what I say about line item veto. I believe that we need to balance the budget, but I believe that we need to get our Congress working to a point where they can make sure that we're balancing our budget.
What budget? There is no budget.
Well, that's right. I was going to tell you, here's the interesting thing. This is the first year in almost 20-some years that our Congress has now passed a budget. I don't know how many people are aware of that. I mean, it's an interesting concept because they haven't passed a budget, and you would ask them, you got to ask your Congressman Boccieri why he doesn't pass a budget. I got to tell you, I've run, as I've told you, almost 60 businesses I've owned, operate, and managed, and we start with a budget, and you live with a budget. That's how you'll understand what you can spend and what you can't. And today we don't have that.
To people on the local level, they're really having a struggling time. When Congress says, oh, it's only 2% of the healthcare bill is pork, or 3% is pork, that doesn't really mean a hell of beans to the federal budget. These pork items are now getting so large, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Congress has yet to ever prove they can restrain themselves, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. How do you propose, other than line item veto, a porkless Congress?
Well, I think I try to, if you think about it, it's the same thing in a running a business. If you put a statutory limit on total spending of 20% of GDP, you're going to see the costs are going to have to come down. They have to. We're on track right now. I think the last thing I heard was we're on track to get to 41% of GDP. And if we continue with our spending and our interest rate and our interest costs, there's some out there that say that we'll get to 80% of GDP. We need to put it at 20% and force everybody to start bringing these expenses down. But I also think we need to look at it from that level first before you start taking individual slices. Let's get it down to where it's livable. Let's force people to bring it down, and then let's look at it individually as we go forward. The same way I would do running a business. I mean, my goal is to take business background to Washington. It may sound strange, but I got to tell you, there's only 2 CPAs in Washington today. I would be the third. There's only 20% of the people in Washington who have business backgrounds. Right? If you want to balance a budget, and you want to get costs in line, let's get people in there that have done that before. Right here first.
Do you have any ideas on controlling the border?
Well, I'm a firm believer that the first thing we have to do is control the border. Once we do that, we need to put more dollars toward that. We need to make sure that our borders are protected. You know, whenever you have a leaky faucet, what's the first thing you do is you shut the water off and stop it from coming, and then you fix the problem. Once we can enhance our borders, then I think we just need to enforce the laws that we already have. You know, we already have laws in this country that say if you are hiring an illegal alien, that you have penalties that you have to pay. I mean, again, my experience will tell you that when I was, about 4 years ago, took over the management of a business in Columbus, Ohio. And first thing we did was we asked for I-9 forms. We found out there were 5 people that couldn't produce an I-9 form. We realized we had some illegal aliens. At that time, once we determined that, we removed them from the business because of the penalties. But see, we need to enforce our penalties too. So increase border support to stop people from coming in, and then enforce our laws that we already have. Not add any laws, just enforce what we already have. It's in my website. You know, Israel is one of our best allies in the Middle East. We need to support them. And if you read my website, that's been a position